So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the 1992 musical version of Spartacus that you produced. So where did this idea come from? Did this come from? Did you have a sort of plan to keep going with different musical versions of stories that you really were invested in?
It was certainly one of those that I talked about with my dad before the War of the Worlds.
Right.
It was a book that I had read. It's a true story, but there was a very popular book that was turned into a movie with Kirk Douglas playing Spartacus. And I wasn't wanting to do another science fiction work, and this was an original story that my stepmom, Doreen, my dad's wife, started on with us, and it was heading in exactly the same direction as the War of the Worlds. But very sadly, Doreen had suffered with breast cancer for a number of years, and just as she was starting to work on it, on the script of Spartacus, she passed away. And
Right.
So we wound up eventually with another writer, and Spartacus came out. This is where both Catherine Zeta-Jones and Anthony Hopkins came into my life, and Anthony played the role of Marcus Crassus, who was as I mentioned earlier, the Roman senator who was credited with defeating Spartacus. Catherine played the woman of Spartacus, and it was mostly a singing role, but she also played opposite Anthony as the other sort of part of the story. It was like more of a ping pong match, whereas in the War of the Worlds you have this one journalist who had survived this Martian invasion, and 6 years later he's recounting his story for the newspaper he's now writing for. The name that Catherine was given as the woman of Spartacus was Payleen, which was a name that seems to have existed in that era. And in the story, she's one of the few survivors from the Thracian and European peoples. There was Africans and Germans that built up the armies over time. So she was one of the last to survive, and she was therefore, it was a good character to give the story from the non-Roman point of view. So you had these two characters, Anthony from the Roman side finishing the story off, and Catherine from the Spartacus side talking about their side of the story and her eventual last moments wandering around looking for his body to see if she could bury him properly, but his body was never found.
Right. So quite a lot to fit into a musical. And I noticed that this time you moved away from the sort of disco, sort of funky sound and went to more of a film score-ish sort of sound. Why was that move? Why?
Well, interesting. I've never thought of it like that, as like a film score sound, because there's some very heavy beats and things that had, the grooves of the day changed between 76 and 78 when it came out to what was now the late 80s, and it came out in 1992. It was the nature of the story as well. I worked with an amazing vocal group called Ladysmith Black Mambazo. I don't know if you're familiar with, but they became, over a number of years, they broke through from appearing and not just recording, but touring with Paul Simon on an album called Graceland. And they were from the township of Ladysmith in South Africa. And I wrote these two songs with my lyricist, Gary Osborne, and they were in English, and Ladysmith then added Zulu chants opposite the songs that they were singing in English. Two of the most enjoyable recordings I've ever done. They were just magical to work with. And so what the music was ultimately for the listener was a combination of a type of groove that I wrote for the piece and arranged for it, and their chants, which had rhythms of their own set against the English. So always within the story there was a reason why the music evolved to what it became. Spartacus was the role of Spartacus because he was a powerful gladiator. His role on the singing side was much more powerful. I think you'd say it had a serious rock edge to it. And the whole idea was for me to, like the War of the Worlds, to thread it all together to sound like it was a natural, continuous work. The War of the Worlds, like Spartacus, has no cuts on it. You don't come to the end of a cut and there's a bit of a gap and then another song. It's a continuous work. But you're certainly right that it's a different sound than the War of the Worlds. And I'm hoping actually to return to it and explore it for live performance, because it's actually a real natural to perform live. I want to, like I've done with the War of the Worlds, I want to add a couple of new pieces and just go back to work on it before we'd return to it properly in a way that we're performing it. But it's an interesting observation you made. I've never actually thought about it as being more filmic.